A historic speech to Parliament, a private meeting with abuse survivors, a golden rose for the Virgin Mary, and a stadium where the Pope scored, in his own words, a super goal for the Church. Day 3 in Madrid was the heaviest day of the trip and the most important. 5 moments. Let me walk you through all of them. It started at 9:30 in the morning with a private meeting between Leo XIV and Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, about 20 minutes at the Apostolic Nunciature. Then, at 10:30, the Pope got in the car and drove to the Palacio de las Cortes, the seat of the Spanish Parliament. And he became the first pope in history to address it. 500 members of Parliament and senators were in the chamber. They greeted him with a long applause as he entered. He was received by the presidents of the Congress and the Senate, signed the guest book, and received a reproduction of the Book of Hours. Then he took the podium. And he spoke for a long time, about almost everything. He opened by rooting the speech in Spain's intellectual heritage. Don Quixote, Teresa of Avila, Unamuno, and, above all, the School of Salamanca. 500 years ago, when Spain was opening up new worlds and encountering peoples it had never met, the theologians of Salamanca asked a question that nobody wanted to ask. Does the power of conquest have moral limits? Is every human being, regardless of origin, a subject of rights and dignity? Francisco de Vitoria and his colleagues said yes, and that answer, Leo XIV argued, entered the conscience of the international community and never left. This is one of the great legacies of Spain, he said, having united historical action with moral clarity. And it lives on in these very Cortes, every time the legislator asks how to ensure that what is possible is just, that what is legal is truly human. Then he turned to the present, on peace, and he was direct. Every war constitutes a painful defeat of the capacity to negotiate and of that common conscience of humanity which recognizes bonds of justice between nations. Weapons can impose a temporary silence, but they can never build an authentic and lasting peace. And then, something that landed hard in the room. It is worrying that, in various parts of the world, and also in Europe, rearmament is being presented again as an almost inevitable response to the fragility of the international scenario. Real security, he said, comes from justice, patient dialogue, respect for international law, and a policy capable of putting the lives of peoples before the interests that profit from war. He went further. The development of AI in the military field requires rigorous ethical vigilance, so that decisions about life and death are never delegated to automatisms or removed from the moral responsibility of the human person. On migration, he called it an eminently moral and juridical question. He asked for safe and legal pathways, respectful reception, real integration, and alongside that, the right not to emigrate, the right to be able to live with dignity in one's own country, without being forced to leave due to lack of peace, security, or dignified living conditions, economic inequalities, or the effects of the climate crisis. On life, he said, can a community call itself fully just that, leaves in the shadows the unborn child, the elderly person, the sick person, the one who suffers in silence, or whoever depends entirely on the care of others? The defense of human life is not a matter of particular interest or confessional concern. It is a goal of civilization. Every human life must be recognized and protected from conception to its natural end. On the family, the first school of humanity, where one learns, before anywhere else, the elementary grammar of living together. On freedom of religion and conscience, including, specifically, the sacramental seal of confession. He called for its legal protection, describing it as a sacred space of interior freedom, where the believer can open his soul to God without fear of external pressure. On language, words can open roads or close them. They can illuminate reality or distort it to the point of making encounter impossible. Those with public responsibility have a special obligation to guard the word, to disarm language. Firmness does not require contempt. Dissent does not imply humiliation. And at the end, looking up at the paintings on the walls of the chamber, some of which evoke the Gospel and the Decalogue, he said, "A law does not reach its true greatness simply because it has been formally approved. It reaches it when, beyond being valid in form, it can present itself before the dignity of the person and pass that examination without shame." He left the chamber to nearly 10 minutes of sustained applause. Before leaving, he wrote in the guest book, "With the hope that respect for the rights of all may always be the basis of the legislative activity of this democratic seat of Spanish national sovereignty." From Parliament, Leo XIV went to the headquarters of the Spanish Bishops' Conference. The bishops gave him a warm welcome, noting that their conference was founded in 1966 and is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. 6 decades of profound social, cultural, and ecclesiastical transformation. The Pope's address to the bishops was built around a single image, the pilgrimage, the Camino de Santiago. "What do you carry? What do you leave behind?" He said, "One temptation on a journey is to become obsessed with what you're leaving, the places, the things, the forms, without opening yourself to the newness of what you find. The other temptation is overpacking, filling your bag with useless things that end up being a burden." But he also said, "A person alone, without roots and without resources, suffers terribly. You need to carry the essentials." And what are the essentials? The bread of the Word and the Eucharist? More necessary than material food, because they open the road to salvation. The rich Christian heritage of Spain, its beauty, its spiritual identity, its capacity to reach even non-believers, and the ability to communicate, to learn the language of the other, to start processes, to weave bonds where the seed of the kingdom can be sown. He talked about the challenge of evangelizing rural Spain. Those immense Castilian plains, empty to our eyes, and the challenge of evangelizing great cities, where silence and distance are not spatial but intimate. He talked about vocations, not as a numbers problem. Pastoral vocational ministry cannot be reduced to a simple search for numbers. It is born from living communities, from joyful priests, from families capable of witnessing the beauty of fidelity. He talked about seminaries, directly. Seminarians have the right to the best possible formation. The Church, for its part, has the right to well-formed priests. And he talked about the abuse crisis, without avoiding it. One of the most painful encounters is with those who have been wounded by the very people who should have cared for them, including members of the clergy. Every wounded person must be able to find sincere listening, welcome, protection, and real pathways to healing. He ended with a prayer from St. John of Avila, the patron of the Spanish clergy, whose priestly ordination is being commemorated this year at its 500th anniversary. "If you send me, Lord, to do what you have done, give me your heart." This is the moment that didn't make it into the official program. The moment that wasn't announced in advance, and in some ways, the most important moment of the entire day. In the afternoon, at the Apostolic Nunciature in Madrid, Leo XIV met privately with 6 survivors of abuse by members of the clergy and the Church in Spain. The meeting lasted nearly an hour. It was the first time Leo XIV has met with abuse survivors during an international trip. But it wasn't his first such meeting overall. In October last year, he received members of ECA Global, an international human rights organization for abuse survivors, at the Vatican. In November, he spent nearly 3 hours with 15 survivors in Belgium. In February, he met an Irish survivor of abuse at Blackrock College in Dublin who said afterward, "Pope Leo felt my pain." The 6 survivors who met him today are part of a project called Repara, an initiative of the Archdiocese of Madrid. The acronym stands for 4 pillars: recognition, prevention, support, and reparation. During the conversation, each of the survivors shared not only their painful personal experiences, but also concrete proposals for making the Church's response more effective. Leo XIV listened with attention and affection. He assured them of his closeness and of the closeness of the whole ecclesial community. And he committed to using their proposals as a foundation for further efforts. The context in Spain is significant. An investigation presented to the Spanish Parliament gathered 487 testimonies from survivors of abuse in the Catholic Church in Spain. Journalistic investigations followed, and in March of this year, an agreement was signed between the Bishops' Conference, the Conference of Religious, the Spanish Ombudsman's Office, and the Ministry of the Presidency, to define a system of recognition and reparation for survivors. Leo XIV's meeting today was not a publicity gesture. It was a pastoral commitment, made privately, in the middle of a day already packed with historic public moments. Before heading to the Bernabéu, Leo XIV stopped at the Cathedral of Santa Maria la Real de la Almudena, the main cathedral of Madrid, which sits directly across from the royal palace. He was welcomed by Cardinal Cobocano, the Archbishop of Madrid. 2 children offered flowers. He walked the central nave, took his place at the altar, and delivered a short but striking homily. He offered the cathedral's patroness, the Virgin of the Almudena, the Golden Rose, one of the oldest papal honors traditionally given to Marian shrines of special spiritual significance. It symbolizes the joy of the resurrection and the Pope's filial love for the Virgin Mary. And he built his homily around the legend of the image itself. The story goes that in times of persecution, the image of the Virgin was hidden inside the walls of the ancient citadel of Madrid to protect it. It remained hidden for a long time, until a miraculous partial collapse of the walls revealed it, intact. Leo XIV took that image and turned it into a message for today. It was thanks to a fallen wall that the reunion of the Mother with her people happened. And then, in our current societies, there are still many walls that do not protect, but divide, distance, and isolate. Sometimes, thinking that tearing them down means having to face what we don't like, we prefer the comfort of propping them up, or, more frequently, ignoring them. But Our Lady of the Almudena, he said, tells us something different. To build something new, beautiful, and lasting, one must be willing to tear down walls, because to resume the journey, we need spaces that allow us to glimpse the horizon. He ended by asking Mary to help the people of Madrid be builders of bonds that restore the universal language of communion, fraternal love, and concord. And then the final event of the day, the Santiago Bernabéu Stadium, home of Real Madrid, one of the most famous stadiums in the world. And tonight, it was full of the diocesan community of Madrid. When Leo XIV arrived, he did a lap in a golf cart among the faithful. Cardinal Cobocano greeted him and placed on his head, and then the Pope looked at the Archbishop and said with a smile, I imagine that for a footballer, scoring a goal in this stadium is something that marks your life. But Don Jose, today, the Church of Madrid has scored a super goal forever. The crowd loved it. His speech built on a musical metaphor, polyphony, the art of many voices singing together in unity. He said, "Numbers, data, and facts are not enough to generate community. Our heart needs to sing." The Church is called to learn the art of polyphony, unity in diversity, without uniformity. He quoted his own encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, on the figure of Nehemiah, who involved the entire community in rebuilding Jerusalem. Rebuilding today means recognizing that, in the plurality of voices and visions, there exists a luminous possibility, building together, transforming diversity into a resource. He talked about the mission of the Church in a great city, how Madrid is a city where different traditions and souls coexist, where God knows the heart of each of its inhabitants, one by one, and where the Church is called to reach the deepest nuclei of the soul of cities. He called priests to practice communal discernment, to stop regularly with their people to read the life of their neighborhoods, cultural changes, social tensions, ecclesial practices in the light of the gospel. When we reduce ecclesial life to a routine in which each person remains closed in their habits and their role, what is missing is the Spirit. The Spirit stirs up vocations and unites them, sometimes provoking agitation, discussion, the search for new equilibria. Don't be frightened by all this. Enjoy it. And then the line that ended the evening. The goodness of even a few can overcome the fear of many. Be for everyone like an open Bible. On your faces and in your lives, let the Word of God be encountered. Love, in fact, is the language that makes everyone feel at home. 5 moments. 1 day. A speech to Parliament that will be quoted for years. A private meeting with bishops that laid out the challenges of a church on pilgrimage. An hour with 6 abuse survivors that nobody had put on the program. A golden rose for the Virgin of the Almudena. And a stadium full of the Church of Madrid, learning to sing in polyphony. Day 3 was the heaviest day of the trip. It was also the most complete. Tomorrow, Leo XIV leaves Madrid and heads to Barcelona, where Gaudí's centenary, the Sagrada Família, and a prison visit await. I'll be covering it. Make sure you're subscribed. If this video helped you follow the journey, hit like. It genuinely makes a difference for this channel. And tell me in the comments, which of these 5 moments struck you most? For me, it's the survivors. But I want to know what you think. God bless. See you tomorrow.